What would you do if someone stole your seat? Not out of confusion, but out of assumption. She was calm, composed, a black woman CEO, with a first-class ticket and every right to sit where she was assigned. But the man standing over her didn't see that. He saw something else, something he thought didn't belong. The flight attendant didn't ask questions. The pilot didn't intervene. And for a moment, the entire cabin held its breath. Would she move? Would she give in to the pressure? Or would she stay seated, not in protest, not in anger, but in quiet, undeniable truth? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about power, about dignity, about what happens when one woman decides that being invisible is no longer an option. Who was she? Why did the flight halt just 5 minutes later? And what did her silence say that no speech ever could? If you believe stories like this need to be heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The line at Gate 27C moved slowly. Too slowly for a Thursday morning at Denver International. But Dr. Camilla Reese didn't mind. She wasn't in a rush. For once. Her flight was scheduled for 10:15 a.m., and she had arrived at the gate nearly an hour early, holding a soft leather bag in one hand and a travel folder in the other. She wore a slate gray tailored pantsuit with flat shoes, the kind that made her look like she might be headed to a negotiation, but the kind that also told the world she had nothing to prove. Her black coiled hair was pulled back neatly. No makeup today. Just clear eyes and a quiet kind of elegance. Camilla glanced at the boarding pass again. Seat 3A, first class, not just for comfort, but because she needed the space to work. She had an important meeting later that day in D.C., a private briefing with the Federal Transportation Oversight Board, something she had been preparing for, quietly, for months. Mindwell Systems, the mental health tech company she built from scratch, had compiled a comprehensive report on racial disparity in air travel experience, discrepancies in seat upgrades, disproportionate customer service escalations, patterns of surveillance. Camilla wasn't just traveling. She was carrying data that could change the industry. The boarding call finally came. First class and Group 1 are now welcomed aboard. That includes our medallion and diamond passengers. Camilla stepped forward, scanning her pass. The scanner beeped green. She smiled politely at the gate agent and walked onto the jet bridge. Her steps were unhurried, deliberate. She liked walking last in first class. She didn't want to be the kind of person who rushed to sit down before everyone else. She wanted to enter quietly, observe, then settle. The plane was cold. Rows of navy blue leather greeted her, along with the standard sterile scent of recirculated air and citrus-scented sanitizer. A young attendant nodded at her near the front galley. "Welcome aboard," she said, with a practiced smile. Camilla nodded back, offering a quiet thank you as she moved forward. She stopped at row 3. Seat 3A, the window seat, except someone was already sitting in it. Camilla paused. It wasn't confusion. She had memorized the seat. First class, third row, aside. The man sitting there was leaning back with his laptop open, a navy blazer hanging behind him, and a glass of pre-poured water on the tray table. He didn't look up. He was already settled in. Camilla rechecked her pass, then glanced at the overhead bin. It was nearly full. Her eyes moved back to the man. Still no acknowledgement. She cleared her throat gently and said, "Excuse me, I believe this is my seat." The man finally looked up. He was white, mid-50s, with a close-shaved head and a sharp jawline. His eyes squinted like she had interrupted something critical. "This one," he asked, pointing at the seat. "I'm pretty sure it's mine." Camilla offered a polite smile and held up her pass. 3A, she said softly. He didn't look at the boarding pass. Instead, he tapped the screen on his phone and said, "You sure you didn't get bumped? The system's been glitchy all week." "I booked this seat a month ago," Camilla said. Still calm. The man sighed. Not aggressively, but with a kind of practiced entitlement. The kind of sigh that said, "Here we go again." He looked back at his screen. "I think we can both ask the attendant." "No big deal." Before she could respond, the flight attendant from earlier returned, noticing the pause in boarding. "Is there a problem?" The man jumped in before Camilla could speak. "Yeah, we've got some confusion over seating. She thinks this is her seat, but I'm pretty sure it's mine. I checked in early." Camilla turned to the attendant. "My ticket is for 3A, she said, handing it over without defensiveness. The attendant looked at the pass, her brow furrowed. "Oh, one moment, please," she said, walking toward the front of the cabin. Camilla stood still. She didn't want to argue, didn't want to escalate, but something about the moment, the way the man had confidently taken the seat, the way he assumed she was wrong, sat uneasily in her chest. It wasn't new. She had seen it before, at boardrooms, at conferences, at her son's high school PTA meetings. A quiet reordering of truth based on who people assumed had the right to be there. The attendant returned a moment later with another woman in a blazer, likely the gate supervisor. She wore a Bluetooth headset and a forced smile. "Ma'am," she said, "would you mind stepping off the plane for just a moment while we clarify your seat?" Camilla didn't move at first. She felt the weight of the request settle into her spine. Step off the plane. She looked at the man still sitting in 3A. He had returned to his screen like nothing was happening, as if he had already won something. Camilla took a breath. Her voice was level when she finally said, "I'd prefer to remain on the plane while you check. My boarding pass is correct." The gate supervisor blinked. "I understand. It'll just be a quick clarification." "I understand, too," Camilla replied, "and I'll remain here until it's clear." The cabin was watching now. The passengers in rows 1 and 2 had paused their conversations. Someone in row 4 leaned forward, lips slightly parted. Camilla stayed still, not stubborn, not angry, just present. That presence, the quiet refusal to disappear, shifted the air around her. Somewhere deep in her memory, she heard her mother's voice. "You don't have to fight to be right. You just have to remain." Camilla looked at the overhead bin, then at the open laptop glowing in seat 3A. She didn't sit. Not yet. But she didn't move either. And 5 minutes later, the flight would never take off on time again. Camilla didn't move. She remained in the aisle, her travel folder tucked close to her chest and her eyes steady. The silence around her thickened. For a moment, all that could be heard was the mechanical hum of the aircraft's climate system and the occasional rustle of paper from seatbacks. The gate supervisor shifted uncomfortably. She glanced toward the front of the cabin where the flight attendant Lena Park stood waiting, eyes unsure. A few rows back, passengers began whispering, their voices low, lips tight with curiosity and confusion. Ryan Cade, still occupying 3A, exhaled loudly as if the delay was somehow an inconvenience being unfairly thrust upon him. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for several people nearby to hear. "Just give her another seat and let's move on." Camilla heard it. She didn't react. Instead, she kept her voice even and quiet when she spoke to the supervisor again. "If there's a system issue, I understand. But my name is Dr. Camilla Reese, And I've confirmed this seat multiple times. I have a record of my purchase, my reservation, and my check-in. I'm not asking for a favor. I'm standing for what's already mine." Her voice didn't shake. It never did. Not when she testified before legislative committees. Not when she negotiated merger terms for Mindwell Systems. Not even when she gave the eulogy at her mother's funeral. But this was different. This was more intimate. It wasn't just about a seat. It was about the expectation that she should apologize for her presence. Lena stepped forward now, holding a small tablet in her hands. "Dr. Reese," she said, her voice soft. "I double-checked the manifest. It shows your name listed in 3A. I don't know why it didn't sync earlier." Camilla nodded once. "Thank you." Ryan scoffed from his seat. "Must be some glitch. Still doesn't explain why you're making a whole scene over it." Lena's eyes widened slightly at the comment, but Camilla remained still. She had learned years ago that silence could be sharper than any retort. It left people with nowhere to hide from their own discomfort. The gate supervisor, perhaps realizing the optics of the situation, straightened her shoulders and said to Ryan, "Sir, I'm afraid we'll need you to relocate to the seat that was originally assigned to you." Ryan looked up, stunned. "I've already set up my workspace. I've got a call once we're airborne. You can't expect me to shuffle around now." Lena remained close, hesitant but firm. "Sir, your boarding pass says 3C. That's the aisle seat. 3A was booked under Dr. Reese's name since last month." His jaw tightened. The air around him began to shift, not with heat, but with a kind of stubborn resistance. Camilla recognized it. She had seen that look before. It wasn't confusion. It was entitlement dressed up as inconvenience. It was a belief that being asked to move felt like a personal attack. Passengers began murmuring again. The woman in 2B leaned into her husband. Row 4's teenage daughter whispered into her phone, thumbs dancing quickly across her screen. Camilla turned to Lena. "I'll wait here until it's resolved." Her tone wasn't hostile. It was calm. So calm that it was almost confrontational. Lena nodded and walked back to the front of the cabin. The gate supervisor followed, tapping on her headset and muttering instructions. Camilla stood silently beside row 3. She placed her leather bag gently in the aisle and allowed herself a brief pause. The energy in her chest was tight, not from fear, but from restraint. She thought about texting her son, Malik, but chose not to. Not yet. Not until she knew which way this was going. Instead, her mind drifted to her mother's voice, to the lessons passed down at their kitchen table, over buttered cornbread and late-night news reports. Her mother used to say, "You have to know the difference between a fight and a stand. A fight takes energy. A stand takes presence." Camilla had learned to stand a long time ago, in classrooms where she was the only black girl with advanced math scores, in college lounges where others asked, "Who did you come here with?" in boardrooms where male investors questioned her composure while funding less qualified white founders. But this moment on a plane felt different, because now she was older, because now she had earned every inch of the space she took up. And still, the system looked her in the eye and asked, "Can you please step off for a moment?" A woman across the aisle finally spoke. She had kind gray eyes and wore a simple beige sweater. "Excuse me," she said quietly to Camilla. "I saw you board. You were before me. That seat was open. He got on after." Camilla met her gaze and gave a nod. Not a thank you. Just recognition. One presence meeting another. Ryan, overhearing, snapped. "I didn't steal anything. I was told to sit here. I have executive platinum status. Maybe your records are behind." The gray-eyed woman looked away. The moment hung there. Heavy. Still. Unspoken things stretched between the seat rows like invisible threads. At the front of the plane, the flight deck door opened. Captain Louis Granger stepped out. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his uniform crisp. He carried himself with the kind of composure that came from decades in the sky. But even he paused at the scene unfolding in front of him. He approached Lena and asked something in a low voice. She nodded, handed him the tablet. He scrolled, looked up, and then walked toward Camilla. "Good morning. Dr. Reese," he said. "I understand there's been a seating issue. I'm reviewing the manifest now." His tone was formal, professional, but not cold. Camilla gave a polite nod. "Yes, Captain. There seems to be confusion about Seat 3A. It belongs to me." He reviewed the tablet again, tapped once more, then looked at Ryan Cade. "Sir, it appears you were assigned Seat 3C. The window seat belongs to Dr. Reese. We'd like you to relocate. Please." Ryan didn't move. "This is absurd," he muttered. "All this drama for one seat." "No, sir." Captain Granger replied, "It's not about the seat. It's about honoring the passenger manifest. We don't make exceptions once verified." Ryan turned slowly. For the first time, he looked directly at Camilla. His mouth opened as if he might say something, but he didn't. He stood up. Tension hung in the air like static electricity. Camilla stepped aside, allowing him to move out of the row. She waited until he retrieved his jacket and laptop, then walked past her into 3C. Only then did Camilla place her travel folder into the seat-back pocket and lower herself gently into 3A. She didn't speak, didn't sigh, didn't smirk. She just sat. With the quiet presence of someone who had reclaimed something more than a chair. She wasn't trying to be right. She was reminding them she belonged. As the captain returned to the cockpit and Lena resumed final boarding, the whispers faded. But the air was different now. 5 minutes had passed, and everything had changed. Camilla sat still in her seat. She could feel the shape of it contour around her, firm but unwelcoming, like it needed time to accept her presence. She looked out the window. The tarmac was bright under the morning sun, heat mirages blurring the outline of baggage carts crawling slowly in the distance. From this angle, she could see the edge of the wing, the distant control tower, and beyond that, a row of mountains barely visible through the haze. But the view didn't settle her. She felt her heart thudding, not with fear, not with anger, but with something harder to define. It was the residue of a moment too familiar. The experience of having your truth questioned in front of an audience, even when the facts are clear, the discomfort of being right and still made to feel like a disruption. Camilla had learned to carry that weight lightly over the years, like a coat she could not take off, but had learned to wear with dignity. Yet something about this moment clung to her more tightly than usual. The flight hadn't taken off yet. Boarding had just finished. Lena passed through the aisle once more, checking overhead compartments, moving quickly, head slightly bowed. When she reached row 3, she paused. She looked at Camilla with something in her expression that wasn't quite shame, but wasn't quite neutrality either. It was a kind of silent apology, the kind people offer when they realize they've watched something unfair and said nothing. Camilla nodded slightly, just enough to acknowledge her. Lena opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again and moved on, in the aisle seat. Ryan Cade had reclined slightly, one leg crossed, scrolling through his phone with theatrical detachment. He didn't look at Camilla, but the shift in his body language, the slight tightness in his jaw, betrayed the tension beneath his calm. Camilla leaned back into her seat and took a slow breath. She reminded herself of the numbers, the data she had memorized and internalized after months of research. Black passengers were 3.4 times more likely to be asked for additional boarding verification in premium cabins. Customer service complaints involving black women were less likely to be resolved on site and more likely to be escalated to airport authorities. And in over 40% of the interviews her team conducted, participants reported being asked to switch seats or downgrade for operational reasons that were never fully explained. She wasn't imagining this. She never had. But knowing the statistics did not insulate her from the sting of the moment. It only made the sting sharper, clearer, more personal. As the safety demonstration began, Camilla closed her eyes. Not to sleep, to breathe. She focused on the sound of her own inhale. Slow, measured. Her mother used to call it reclaiming space within, a way to pull yourself back from the corners the world tried to push you into. The memory returned again. Not a flashback, but a presence. Her mother, Gloria Reese, standing in front of a chalkboard in a crowded classroom on the west side of St. Louis. A tiny woman with a commanding voice, chalk in one hand, justice in the other. You don't have to raise your voice, her mother used to say. Just make sure your silence speaks louder than their noise. Camilla opened her eyes. The plane had begun to taxi. Lena's voice came through the intercom, polite and precise. The hum of the engines grew louder beneath them. They were moving now. Not far from takeoff. Not far from the next moment. Camilla glanced sideways at the seat back in front of her. She could see a child in row 2 watching a cartoon on a tablet, his headphones too big for his head. The simplicity of it struck her, the ease, the innocence. She turned her gaze back to the window. She wondered if anyone else on the plane had noticed what happened. Not just seen it, but noticed it. Had they understood the weight of that request? Had they felt how fragile her dignity might have looked to someone who wasn't carrying the history that informed it? Or had they just seen a woman with a problem, delaying their departure? She felt the familiar pull to move on, to bury it, to tell herself it wasn't worth the energy, but her body would not let it go. Her chest was tight, her throat dry, and though she sat still, she felt like she was bracing for turbulence that hadn't arrived yet. The captain's voice came through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Granger speaking. Thank you for your patience. We've been given clearance and will be airborne shortly. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. We'll be in the air soon. Camilla kept her eyes on the window. The runway appeared, long and pale against the sky. She felt the acceleration begin. The engine roared softly. The cabin tilted. The wheels lifted, and they were in the sky. As the city below grew smaller, Camilla wondered how many times she had flown this route. Dozens, maybe more. How many times had she prepared a presentation mid-flight? How many times had she used these hours to be productive, to justify the cost of first class with more work? But not today. Today, she did not open her laptop. Instead, she opened the small leather notebook she kept in her bag, the one she used only for personal thoughts. Not business, not strategy, just truth. She wrote, "They wanted me to step off the plane. They wanted me to shrink. They wanted me to apologize for a seat I paid for, prepared for, belonged in. And when I didn't, the entire cabin changed." She paused, then wrote, "I didn't speak loudly. I just stayed." She closed the notebook beside her. Ryan Cade shifted again. Camilla sensed him look her way, then look back at his phone. She wondered if he knew what had just happened. Not the seat, not the reassignment, but the deeper thing. The system that moved to protect him, even when he was wrong. The reflex of deference given to someone who didn't ask, but expected. The system that, for a moment, assumed her mistake because it was easier than considering his entitlement. Camilla wasn't angry, not anymore. She was clear. There is a system you cannot see unless you've lived beneath it, unless you've had to stand, again and again, while others doubt the ground beneath your feet. And today, she stood by sitting. As the flight continued eastward toward Washington, D.C., Camilla stared out at the clouds, each one like a soft echo of the silence she had chosen. A silence not born of fear, but of power. A silence that would follow them all the way to the ground. The cabin had settled into a hush that was too quiet for comfort. People were pretending to nap, scrolling through phones, flipping through safety cards they'd seen 100 times before. But no one was really relaxing. They were watching, not openly, not like before. Now it was the kind of watching done from the corner of the eye, through the crack between two seats, behind tilted sunglasses. Camilla felt it. She wasn't being stared at anymore. She was being observed, judged, assessed. And it wasn't just about the seat. Now it was about how she was handling it. Was she being too cold? Was she intimidating? Should she have smiled when the captain confirmed her seat? Was she going to write a complaint? Go on social media, make a scene? She knew these thoughts weren't hers. They were the thoughts the world often projected onto women like her, especially black women, especially those who did not bend to discomfort. Camilla sat still, her hands folded in her lap. She had learned long ago that stillness could be mistaken for strength or aloofness, depending on who was looking. Either way, it gave her control. She was not here to perform peace. She was here to reclaim it. Lena Park passed through the aisle again, this time offering drinks. When she reached row 3, her movement slowed. "Can I get you anything?" she asked gently. First to Ryan, then to Camilla. Ryan waved her off, eyes still locked on his phone. Camilla looked up and said, "Just water." "Thank you." Lena nodded and poured it without speaking. As she handed the cup to Camilla, she hesitated for a beat longer than necessary. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for earlier," she whispered. "I should have spoken up right away." Camilla didn't flinch. Her voice remained soft but grounded. "You're not the only one who didn't." Lena looked down, her face flushing slightly, then moved on. Camilla took a sip of the water and set the cup carefully on the tray table. Her fingers lingered near the rim. The weight of the moment had not passed. It was sitting with her now, woven into the threads of her suit, tucked behind her eyes, perched in her throat. She looked around the cabin, not directly at anyone, but just enough to sense the energy. A woman 2 rows ahead typed furiously on her phone, her face tense. Another man across the aisle looked at Camilla and quickly looked away. And then she saw it. A teenage girl in row 4 with braids pulled into a bun and a phone in her lap. She was watching Camilla carefully, her camera lens facing just low enough that it wasn't obvious she was filming. Camilla met her gaze. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't stop the recording either, just nodded, barely noticeable. Camilla looked away. She didn't know what the girl had captured. If she'd started when the gate supervisor asked her to step off the plane, or if it was only when Captain Granger spoke, But something inside Camilla told her this wasn't just about private memory anymore. There was a public watching now, and with it came a kind of unease she hadn't expected. She had always believed in the power of quiet disruption, in holding presence without spectacle. But now, in this age of digital magnification, even silence could become viral. And that scared her, not because she feared scrutiny, but because she feared distortion. She didn't want this moment to become a meme, or a political talking point, or a trending hashtag. She wanted it to remain what it was, a clear, simple truth. She was asked to step off a plane while being right. She stayed seated. She didn't yell. She didn't record. She didn't escalate. She just remained. But would that stillness survive the noise of interpretation? Her phone buzzed in her bag. She reached for it and pulled it out quietly. One message from Malik. "Hey, Mom, you land yet?" She stared at the text for a moment, typed, then deleted. Typed again. "Not yet. We took off late. I'll text you when I land." She put the phone back in her bag. Camilla exhaled slowly. She thought about Malik, 17 now, taller than her, full of questions about the world and his place in it. They had talked often about navigating space, about holding boundaries, but she had never told him about moments like this, not because she was hiding them, but because she never wanted him to carry the weight of her restraint. But maybe she should have. Maybe he needed to know that power was not just in being loud or brilliant or fast. Sometimes it was in staying seated. Sometimes it was in letting the room feel the weight of your refusal to disappear. The captain's voice came on again, announcing light turbulence ahead. Camilla leaned back and closed her eyes. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to feel the ache in her spine. The tiredness she had pushed through to make this meeting, the weight of not just her briefcase, but her name, her history, her reputation, all of it packed carefully, just like her luggage. She thought about what she had to do in Washington, the oversight board, her report, the slides prepared with precision. But suddenly, those bullet points didn't feel like enough. They were data, statistics, trends, but they didn't tell the story of this morning. They didn't tell the story of how systems bend toward the comfortable, how authority often responds more quickly to the familiar face than the accurate one, how deference is handed out along invisible lines that everyone feels, but no one names. Her report didn't tell them that her hands were still trembling, that her throat still carried the echo of almost having to justify her presence, that staying seated had cost her something, even if only a piece of her calm. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence, not violent, just enough to remind everyone how far from solid ground they were. Camilla opened her eyes and stared ahead. She noticed now that the girl in row 4 had put her phone down. She was just looking at her, openly, curiously. Camilla gave her the faintest nod. The girl smiled, and just like that, a quiet thread stretched between them, a thread of recognition, of solidarity. Maybe this would not be her story alone. Maybe it was never meant to be. Maybe the quiet had a different kind of power now, not one that demanded to be seen, but one that refused to be erased. Camilla closed her eyes again, this time not to hide, but to breathe, to center, to remember. The silence she had chosen was not submission. It was strength, and in a world so often built to erase, her presence was resistance, not the loud kind, the lasting kind. The soft ding of the seatbelt sign going off felt like an exhale from the cabin itself. Passengers stirred, trays dropped, laptops opened, and conversations resumed at a gentle hum. But underneath it all, The air still held the weight of what had passed. Camilla remained in her seat, legs crossed at the ankle, her cup of water still half full. She had not touched it since turbulence hit. The plastic ridges pressed lightly into her fingers where she had absent-mindedly gripped it during the moments of vibration in the air. Now, the ride was smooth again, but something inside her wasn't. A subtle flicker of unease had planted itself behind her ribs. She wasn't regretting the moment. Not at all. But something else was shifting. Something she couldn't yet name. She glanced at her phone, expecting no service, but a faint Wi-Fi icon glowed in the corner. The airline's in-flight messaging feature was active. She opened her inbox. One message from her assistant. "Hey, just FYI, something's brewing." "You okay?" Camilla stared at the words. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even her team. The last they heard, she was en route to the board meeting in D.C., scheduled to speak at 4 p.m. She typed back. "All good." "What do you mean, brewing?" The reply came back quickly. "Someone on the plane posted a video. It's already picking up. Caption says black woman asked to give up her seat in first class. Her silence was louder than words." It's getting traction. Camilla felt her stomach tighten. She didn't ask for this. She didn't want a trending moment. She had been careful, deliberate. She had handled it with grace, with patience. And yet, the moment had slipped into the public. She refreshed the message again. Her assistant followed up with a screenshot. It showed a Twitter post, a blurry image of her standing beside 3A, calm but unmoving, facing the gate supervisor. The video was already at 6,400 retweets. Camilla set her phone down slowly. The words rang in her ears. Her silence was louder than words. That wasn't a compliment. Not really. It was a signal, a warning. The moment was no longer hers. She had chosen to stay seated for her own reasons, for her sense of self, for her dignity, for her mother, whose voice lived within her like a gentle refrain. She didn't stay seated to start a movement. She stayed because she belonged in that seat, because she was tired of being asked to move when she was right, because sometimes stillness is the only thing left to give when you've explained yourself too many times. But now it was out there, and she knew what that meant. Interpretation, projection, commentary. People would take the clip and say what they wanted. Some would see strength. Some would call it reverse racism. Some would reduce it to another angry woman moment, even though she had not raised her voice. None of them would feel what she had felt. None of them would carry the tension in her chest or the restraint in her bones. Camilla leaned her head back and stared at the ceiling of the cabin. Tiny overhead lights blinked gently like stars that had lost their meaning. Ryan Cade shifted beside her. He hadn't said a word since switching seats. But now, perhaps sensing something had changed, he glanced sideways. He saw the phone on her lap, the open inbox, the faint buzz of attention. He cleared his throat. "Look," he began. Camilla didn't turn. "I didn't mean for it to get this dramatic," he continued. "It was just a misunderstanding." She still didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because she knew this wasn't about him anymore. Not really. He was part of the moment. Yes, but the system that backed him, the reflex that made 3 people question her claim without verifying his, that was bigger than him, and she had no intention of shrinking it back down to his comfort. He shifted again, uncomfortable now. "I didn't know they gave you that seat," he muttered. "No one told me. I just sat where I was told." Camilla turned her head slightly. just enough to meet his eyes for the first time. Do you always accept things without checking, or just when it benefits you? He opened his mouth, then closed it. She turned back toward the window. He did not speak again. The girl from row 4 passed by, heading to the restroom. She looked older than Camilla first thought, maybe college-aged. Her hoodie had a Howard University patch stitched onto the sleeve. When she returned, she paused beside Camilla's seat. "I didn't mean to make it public," she whispered. Camilla looked up at her. I saw what happened, and I thought people should see." There was no smugness in her voice, no craving for clout, just a quiet earnestness. Camilla held her gaze and nodded. "You're not wrong," she said softly. The girl seemed to relax. "But next time," Camilla added, "ask first." The girl smiled gently. "Yes, ma'am." She returned to her seat. Camilla closed her eyes again, not to escape, but to steady herself. This was happening, whether she wanted it or not. And maybe, just maybe, this moment was no longer hers to carry alone. Later, the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been alerted to a potential media issue involving a passenger on board. We want to reassure everyone that we are cooperating fully with corporate communications and will be landing shortly." Camilla's eyes snapped open. She felt the ripple. Passengers stirred. Ryan stiffened. A man in row 1 turned and looked back, clearly trying to guess who the announcement was referring to. Camilla sat still. Stillness had been her protection, but now it had become the spotlight. The quiet that once shielded her was now illuminating everything. She thought again of her mother. Gloria had always said, "You don't have to carry the burden of change alone, but you do have to be ready when the moment chooses you." Camilla had not chosen this moment, but it had chosen her, and now she had a decision to make. Would she speak? Would she let the video define her narrative? Or would she step into the story now spiraling in her name? The seatbelt sign came back on. The plane began its descent. Outside the window, the city of Washington was drawing near. Camilla looked down at her notebook again. She flipped to a clean page, wrote one sentence. This wasn't the beginning. It was the exposure, and it had been waiting for her all along. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt. For a moment, the cabin was still again. Everyone silent, waiting for that familiar screech of rubber meeting runway to pass. Then came the collective breath, the quiet rustle of movement, the tension dissolving now that they were safely back on the ground. Camilla didn't move. She stayed seated, her hands in her lap, gaze fixed on the window. The skyline of Washington, D.C. stood distant and indifferent, its familiar outline blurred by streaks of cloud. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington National. Please remain seated till we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. Thank you again for flying with us today." The cabin buzzed to life. Phones came out. Texts flew. Camilla heard at least 3 people mention the word video in hushed voices. Someone in row 2 whispered, "I think that's her." And someone else replied, "Just don't say anything." Camilla reached for her phone. 5 unread messages, 2 missed calls, 1 from her assistant, 1 from the communications director at Mindwell Systems. She didn't open them yet. She took a breath instead. Then another. Across from her, Ryan Cade still hadn't looked her in the eye. His body was angled away, tense. He didn't fidget, but the quiet around him was loud. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, people stood in waves, pulling bags from overhead bins. The usual end-of-flight shuffle began. But there was an edge to it now, a self-consciousness. Camilla remained seated, calm, waiting for the rouse ahead to clear. Then she felt it. A hand gently touched her shoulder. She turned. It was Lena Park. "Ms. Reese," she said softly, almost inaudibly. "Corporate has asked to speak with you at the gate." Camilla didn't flinch. She simply nodded. Lena looked like she wanted to say more, but words failed her. She nodded back, stepped aside, and moved down the aisle. Camilla stood, adjusted her bag, and walked down the narrow aisle toward the front of the plane. It was the quietest walk she had ever taken. Every face either avoided hers or stared too long, not in open hostility, but in that gray space where curiosity and discomfort blend. Some passengers wanted to thank her, maybe. Others wanted her to just disappear. When she reached the front galley, Captain Granger stood waiting. He gave her a small, professional nod. "I hope you have a smooth rest of your day, Ms. Reese," he said. Measured. She paused. "Captain," she said, "you made the right call. Eventually." He looked her in the eyes for the first time, then nodded again. At the gate, 2 women stood waiting in tailored navy suits. One was tall, blonde, hair in a tight bun. The other wore glasses and held a tablet. Their name badges read, "Customer Experience Team, Dr." Reese, the one with glasses, said quickly. Camilla gave a small nod. "We just want to apologize for what happened on board today." The woman continued, "It's not how we do things at Aerosky." Camilla raised one eyebrow slightly. The blonde stepped in. "We understand if you'd prefer to speak with legal or PR, but we also wanted to let you know this incident is already being reviewed." Camilla studied their faces, well-rehearsed, concerned, but controlled. Apology, but not accountability. "I'll be in touch," Camilla said. "With the appropriate department." She walked past them without another word. As she exited into the terminal, a sharp gust of cold air from the jet bridge brushed against her face. The crowd in the terminal didn't notice her at first, until someone did. A man in a hoodie looked up from his phone. His eyes widened slightly. Then he nudged the person next to him. Camilla kept walking. She knew that look. The one people give when they think they've spotted a celebrity or a controversy. Outside the terminal, her car service was waiting. The driver, a middle-aged black man with salt and pepper hair, held a sign that read Reese. She nodded, and he opened the door. Inside the SUV, the city rolled by in quiet gray. Camilla opened her phone again. More texts. From her assistant. "We're getting media requests. CNN, The Root, a few bloggers too. Should I hold them?" From her chief communications officer. "We need a strategy call. Let us know if we're issuing a statement or staying silent." Camilla sighed and rested her head against the seat. She had spent decades building her career on empathy, strategy, and clarity, but none of that had prepared her for going viral. The car turned onto Constitution Avenue. The skyline came into view. Distsu stood tall and old and unmoved. She thought about the oversight board waiting at 4 p.m. This was supposed to be the presentation that would shape a year's worth of policy. She had spent months compiling data on bias in corporate travel, hours assembling her case for behavioral design in airline systems, and now her very presence had become the data. The contradiction wasn't lost on her. A ping from her son Malik. "You okay, Mom? It's everywhere." "That video's on Instagram now," Camilla finally typed back. "I'm okay. I'll call you tonight. Don't read the comments." She set the phone down and stared out the window. Her voice had not yet entered this conversation. Others were speaking for her, over her, around her. Some praised her grace. Others questioned her motives. A few accused her of staging it. And through all of it, she had said nothing publicly. She wasn't sure if that was a strength or a mistake. Camilla pulled out her notebook from her bag and opened to the last page. She wrote, "I don't owe them noise, but maybe I owe the next woman clarity." She underlined the word clarity, then put the pen down. The car pulled up to the board building. She stepped out, heels clicking softly against the concrete. Inside, security buzzed her through. The receptionist smiled nervously. "Good afternoon, Dr. Reese. The board is expecting you." She nodded and entered the elevator, alone in the lift. Camilla stared at her reflection in the mirrored walls. Same face, same strength. But the world outside now saw her differently. Not as the strategist, not as the executive. Now, she was a symbol, unclaimed, unspoken, until she chose otherwise. The boardroom was as sleek and polished as she remembered it, a long walnut table that stretched nearly to the windows, 12 high-backed chairs in smooth black leather, and a wall-mounted screen that already glowed with the first slide of her presentation. Bias in corporate travel design flaws and behavioral oversight. Camilla stood at the edge of the room, fingers lightly brushing the edge of the table. Her briefcase rested on the chair beside her, unopened. She was early. The others had not arrived yet. She looked out through the tall windows. The city pulsed below gray streets, white buildings, slow-moving traffic. It was all so normal, so undisturbed, and yet her mind still hadn't quieted. She breathed in deeply, eyes half closed. The silence of the boardroom was nothing like the silence on the plane. Here, it felt expectant, controlled. There, it had been heavy, holding something unsaid. The door opened. Board members began to file in familiar faces, people she had presented to for years. Some nodded at her. A few smiled politely. One or two seemed overly warm, as if making up for something they hadn't been part of. Camilla offered short greetings. Each one measured. She took her place at the front of the room, waiting as everyone settled in. When the final member, a man named Ted Bowers, took his seat, the room fell still. "Dr. Reese," said Chairwoman Ellen Marlowe, a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. "Whenever you're ready." Camilla clicked the remote in her hand. The title slide dissolved into a graph. It showed boarding data from 4 major airlines' entry times, seat disputes, compensation offers, escalation percentages. She had rehearsed this. She knew every number, every pattern, but something about the graph felt empty now. She stared at it for a beat too long. Then, quietly, she said, "I'm going to begin this presentation a little differently than planned." There was a slight shift in the room. Curious glances exchanged. "I boarded a plane this morning to come here." Camilla said, "My name was on the manifest. My seat had been confirmed. First class. 3A. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at them. And when I arrived at my seat, it was occupied. The crew didn't question the man sitting in it. They questioned me, asked me to step off, to let them sort it out." A few board members leaned forward slightly. "I stayed seated," she continued, "not because I wanted to make a point, but because I was tired, because I had paid, because I belonged there." Silence. This morning, I lived the very patterns I have spent 2 years researching. Not in theory, not through data points, but in real time, in public, with assumptions flying faster than the plane itself. She let that settle, and I realized something on the flight here. She said, This seat, any seat, is never just a seat. It is a proxy for power, for visibility, for who is seen as natural in a space, and who must constantly prove they belong. A soft murmur moved across the table. Camilla clicked again. Now the slide showed a heat map of customer complaints by race and gender, tied to seating disputes. Black women are the least likely to be offered apologies when a seat mix-up occurs, she said. They're also the most likely to be asked to move first, regardless of boarding order or ticket status. Another click. A video clip. Muted. No sound. It was her. The clip from the plane. The image showed her standing beside 3A, arms calm, posture straight, as 3 crew members stood in front of her, uncertain what to do. The room tensed. "I didn't give this video to the public," she said. "Someone else recorded it, and now it's out there." She faced them again. "I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be heard. I want the data to matter because the lives behind it matter." Ellen Marlowe leaned forward, hands clasped. "What would you like us to do with this, Dr. Reese?" Camilla didn't hesitate. "Shift your framework," she said. "You've been treating bias like an unfortunate side effect. It's not. It's a flaw in the design." She stepped closer to the table. When boarding procedures don't include name verification checks for all passengers, assumptions fill the gap. When training doesn't address unconscious bias, confusion becomes protocol. And when apology is treated as an admission of liability instead of dignity, companies lose trust. Someone across the room, a younger board member named Riley, nodded slowly. "So you're suggesting we move from reactive to preventative?" he asked. "I'm suggesting we redesign the system so it doesn't need a reaction at all," Camilla said. "And it starts by naming the problem out loud." She let her words land, waited just long enough. Then she clicked to the final slide. It was blank. Just one sentence in bold letters. "This is not an isolated incident." Camilla placed the remote down. "I'm done presenting numbers," she said. "I'm presenting truth now." Silence again. But this one felt different. Not empty, not cautious. It felt like attention. Chairwoman Marlowe leaned back, thoughtful. "This," she said slowly, "is more than policy." Camilla nodded. "It always has been." The boardroom was quiet for a long moment. Then Ellen spoke again. "We'll reconvene tomorrow morning, but I'd like to propose something before we adjourn today. Dr. Reese, would you consider leading a task force to implement these design changes across all participating airlines?" Camilla blinked. That hadn't been part of her plan. But maybe this moment, this intersection of personal truth and institutional responsibility, was exactly the space she needed to step into. "I would," she said, "but only if the mandate includes enforcement, not just advisory." Ellen smiled slightly. "We can work with that." Camilla exhaled slowly. She packed up her briefcase. Finally, closed it with care. The boardroom doors opened, and she walked out not just as a researcher, not just as an executive, but as something else now. A witness, a voice, and maybe a beginning. Camilla stepped out of the glass doors of the board building into the cold D-Soul afternoon, and the noise hit her instantly. A small crowd had gathered along the sidewalk. Some held phones in the air. Others just stood silently, unsure whether to treat her like a celebrity or a cautionary tale. Someone called her name. Dr. Reese. She didn't stop walking. Another voice, louder. "Camilla, can you tell us why you refused to leave your seat?" She kept moving, jaw set. A young woman with a mic jogged to keep up. "What do you say to people accusing you of weaponizing race?" Camilla paused. She turned slowly. her eyes level with the reporter's. "Ma'am," she said, her voice even and quiet, "I didn't weaponize anything. I stayed in the seat I paid for." The reporter blinked. A second passed. Then Camilla walked away again. She slipped into the waiting car and shut the door. The noise became muffled glass and engine hum. Her driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You all right?" Camilla nodded once. "Take me to the hotel, please." As the car pulled into traffic, she exhaled, not a sigh, something quieter than that. A soft release of breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her phone buzzed. This time it was a voicemail from her college friend Alexis. They hadn't spoken in months. The message was only 20 seconds long. "Girl, I saw the video. I don't even have words. I'm proud of you. But I also hope you're okay. Call me." Camilla didn't press play again. She knew what she would hear in that voice. Concern, confusion, maybe admiration, maybe fear. She wasn't ready to pick any of it apart yet. Instead, she scrolled through social media. There she was, still frame after still frame. One post called her the Rosa Parks of Row 3. Another read, "CEO pulls power play on plane." A third, more thoughtful one, asked, "Why does a black woman's stillness feel threatening to so many people?" The comments were another story, some supportive, some brutal, some confused. She clicked on one post from a civil rights account. It had over 20,000 shares. The caption read, "Doctor." Camilla Reese didn't shout. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. And still, they saw her as a problem. Camilla stared at the words. She had done nothing but sit. And yet the world had filled that silence with noise. Her hotel came into view, a quiet, boutique building tucked between embassies. She chose it because it felt like anonymity. Today, it felt like a small mercy. The lobby was warm and dimly lit. She nodded to the front desk attendant, who handed her the key without a word. Inside her suite, Camilla finally sat down. Not in first class, not in a boardroom. Just a chair, a real chair. Wood and fabric, and no assumptions attached. She sat there, coat still on, bag still over her shoulder, and stared at nothing. For a long time, she didn't move. Then her phone lit up again. "Malik?" This time, she answered. "Hey," she said. "Hi, Mom." His voice came through, gentle, older than his years. "You home?" she asked. "Yeah. Been watching the news like everyone else." "You okay? I'm managing." He hesitated. "It's kind of everywhere. People at school are talking about it." Camilla's hand tightened slightly around the phone. "I didn't mean for this to be public," she said. "I know," he said, "but maybe it needed to be." She didn't speak for a moment. "Do you think I did the right thing?" she finally asked. "Mom," he said, "you did what was right for you. That's what matters. The rest. People are going to twist things no matter what. But I saw you. You didn't flinch, and I'm proud of you." She closed her eyes. "Let that settle. Thanks, baby." After they hung up, Camilla finally slipped off her coat. Her shoulders ached in that specific way that came from holding too much in one place for too long. She opened her laptop. 3 new emails from the communications director, 2 from the airline, 1 from an old mentor, and 1 unexpected one from a young journalist at a major magazine. The subject line read, "Request for interview your voice, not theirs." She stared at that line for a long time. Her voice, not theirs. She wasn't sure she was ready to speak, but she was tired of being misquoted by silence. Camilla stood and moved to the window. Outside, Dusk had started to fall. The city glowed in slow gold, headlights flickering like questions with no clear answers. She thought of her mother again. Gloria always said, "Silence is power, but only when it's yours to hold." When others start to speak over it, you have to decide, do you stay still or do you speak for yourself? Camilla had stayed still, but the world was speaking. Maybe it was time to say something back. She sat at the small hotel desk, opened a blank document, and stared at the blinking cursor. Then she typed, "I was not disruptive. I was not angry. I was simply present." And sometimes that is the most defiant act of all. She paused, then continued. "They asked me to move, not because I was wrong, but because they didn't expect someone like me to be in that seat. That's not just a flight issue. That's a societal one. And it doesn't end with me." She wrote for another hour. She didn't plan a speech. She wrote her truth, not polished, not press-ready, but real. And when she finished, she closed the laptop gently and looked out the window again. The world outside had grown quieter. Or maybe she had just stopped letting it drown her out. Camilla Reese was ready, not for war, not for drama, but for her voice to finally step into the noise. Camilla sat in the makeup chair beneath the soft studio lights, her reflection staring back at her, impossibly calm. The producer hovered nearby, double-checking camera angles and mic levels. A technician leaned in to adjust her lapel mic, brushing her shoulder lightly. "Sound check," he said. She nodded. "Testing 1, 2. Testing." Her voice came out steady, but she felt the quiver under it. Across the room, the young journalist, her name was Rachel Lynn, sat quietly flipping through notes. She looked barely 30, brown hair in a loose ponytail, blazer a bit too big for her shoulders. Nervous energy radiated from her, but there was also a calm to her gaze, like she knew this story wasn't hers to shape, it was Camilla's to tell. "Ms. Reese," Rachel said, stepping forward, "thank you for trusting me with this." Camilla offered a quiet smile. "You didn't send a list of questions in advance." Rachel looked momentarily concerned. "I figured this shouldn't be rehearsed," she said. "We can go over anything you're uncomfortable with." Camilla shook her head slowly. "No, I think it's time I speak plainly." They sat facing each other in a small studio set made to look like a living room, soft chairs, warm lighting, no desk between them, just space, just conversation. The cameras blinked red. They were live. Rachel leaned in. "Dr. Reese, thank you again for joining us. You've been in the public eye for a few days now, but until today, you haven't spoken directly. May I ask why?" Camilla folded her hands in her lap. "I wasn't sure I needed to," she said. "I figured the video spoke for itself. I thought people would understand. But silence is a vacuum. And I realized that people were filling in my story for me." Rachel nodded. "Some have called you brave. Others say you were disruptive. How do you respond to both?" Camilla looked down for a moment, then back up. "Neither label is quite right," she said. "I wasn't trying to be brave, and I certainly wasn't being disruptive. I was being still. And for some people, stillness from a black woman feels like confrontation." There was a pause. Rachel let it breathe. "What were you feeling in that moment?" she asked. "When they asked you to move," Camilla's gaze drifted past the camera for a second, as if the memory had returned without permission. "I felt tired," she said. "Not physically, just tired of explaining myself, tired of defending spaces I'd already earned, tired of being seen as a visitor." She let her words hang in the air. Rachel hesitated, then asked softly, Was there ever a moment you considered just giving up the seat? Yes, Camilla said immediately. Many times in those first 2 minutes. But then I remembered my mother, Gloria Reese. Rachel asked. Camilla smiled faintly. She was a school teacher. She taught me to speak with clarity, but also to listen when silence was louder. She once told me, "Every time you give up your place without cause, you teach them you never belonged there." That was in my head the whole time. Rachel nodded, visibly moved. "I know this story has become much larger than one flight," she said. "It's now tied to national conversations about bias, policy, even executive leadership. Does that feel like a weight?" Camilla exhaled. "It feels like a spotlight," she said. "One I didn't ask for, but now that it's here, I want to use it for something real." Rachel flipped a page on her notepad. "May I ask what that something real looks like?" Camilla sat up a little straighter. "It looks like redesigning boarding procedures, training flight staff to recognize unconscious bias, creating clear accountability channels when passengers are mishandled, and it looks like hiring more diverse leadership in airline companies." Rachel looked impressed. "You've come with a plan." Camilla gave a gentle nod. "I always come with a plan." Then Rachel asked the question Camilla had known would come. "Do you forgive the man who took your seat?" Camilla was silent for a long moment. "I don't know him," she said, "but I do forgive what he represents. Because I've been taught to believe that grace isn't weakness, it's clarity. And it doesn't mean letting go of responsibility. It means letting go of bitterness." Rachel's voice softened. "That's beautiful." Camilla looked at her, firm but kind. "It's necessary." The interview continued for another 10 minutes, touching on her work in mental health, her role as a CEO, her hopes for what happens next. When it ended, the cameras went dark and Rachel stepped forward, a little teary-eyed. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. Camilla nodded. It was time. Outside the studio, the cold air hit her like a wave. The sun was setting again, streaking the sky in deep amber and ash. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. "They want you on Good Morning America. Your LinkedIn post just hit 2 million views." And the airline released a statement. They're instituting a policy review. Camilla didn't smile. She didn't react. She just kept walking. The car waited. She slid inside, and this time she didn't stare out the window. She stared inward, because now it wasn't about the seat. It was about what that seat had revealed, and who had been watching, and who might be next. At the hotel, she sat again at the same small desk where she'd written her first words. She opened her notebook to a blank page and wrote, "Today I spoke," and the world did not tremble. It listened. "It's not enough to take your place. You have to reshape the room once you're in it." She closed the notebook and pressed her hand to the cover. Then she whispered aloud, "To no one in particular, I'm not finished." Camilla didn't expect the silence to feel louder after the interview, but it did. The next morning, she walked through Reagan National Airport under a borrowed baseball cap and oversized sunglasses, trying to be invisible again. But it was different now. Well, every passing traveler seemed like they might recognize her. Some did. Most just looked twice, hesitating like they were searching for a memory. Her flight was scheduled for Gate B-17, and she arrived early on purpose. She didn't want the boarding process to become a scene again. This time, her name had been double-checked by 3 departments. The airline had even assigned her a liaison. She waited at the gate with a cup of tea. Her phone buzzed every few seconds, but she ignored it. This flight was about getting home. Nothing more. She was flipping through a paperback when a soft voice spoke. "Excuse me, Dr. Reese." Camilla looked up. A young woman in uniform stood there, clutching a clipboard against her chest. She couldn't have been older than 24, Latina, dark curls pinned neatly beneath her cap. Her name tag read Marisol. Camilla smiled gently. "Yes." Marisol took a step closer, eyes flicking around to make sure no one else was listening. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did, for staying seated." Camilla tilted her head, a little surprised. "You work for the airline?" Marisol nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I'm in training for customer operations. We've been talking about your flight. A lot." Camilla put her book aside and leaned in slightly. "And how do you feel about it?" Marisol's eyes filled for a moment, but she blinked fast. "I didn't know how to put it into words, but watching you, it made me realize something. I've seen people treated unfairly at the gate. I always thought, maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe it's not my place to say something." She paused. "But when I saw how calm you were, how strong, I thought, if she can stay seated when the whole world's watching, then I can speak up when no one is." Camilla felt a tightness in her throat, not from pain, but something gentler. Gratitude, responsibility. She reached out and touched Marisol's hand. "Then you've already started changing things," she said softly. Marisol smiled, nervous and warm. "I hope so. Anyway, I didn't want to bother you. I just needed you to know." "You didn't bother me at all," Camilla said. "You reminded me why it mattered." Marisol gave a tiny wave and disappeared into the bustle of the concourse. Camilla sat still for a long while after that. That one conversation did more than the press, more than the viral clips. It grounded her, not in shame, but in purpose. Her flight was finally called. She boarded first this time. No debate, no resistance. The flight attendant scanned her ticket with a knowing smile. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Reese," she said. "We've been expecting you." Camilla found her seat 2A this time and sat down slowly. The plane was still empty. The quiet hum of the cabin felt familiar again. She looked out the window. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt centered. As other passengers boarded, no one approached her, but several looked her way with soft expressions. One man gave a subtle nod. A woman walking past whispered, "Thank you." Camilla didn't reply aloud. She just acknowledged each one with her eyes. When the plane took off, she closed her eyes and let the engine noise drown out everything else. No commentary, no hashtags, just the weightless moment of climbing. Somewhere over Ohio, the seatbelt sign turned off. She stood to stretch and found herself face to face with an older black woman walking back from the restroom. The woman paused. "You're her, aren't you?" she asked with a slight smile. Camilla smiled back. "That depends who you mean." The woman chuckled. "Don't be coy. I saw you on TV yesterday. I'm proud of you, baby. Not because you made a fuss, but because you didn't." Camilla took a breath. "Thank you. I didn't know what it would become." The woman nodded. "None of us ever do. That's how history works. One quiet act at a time. Later." As the plane descended, Camilla took out her journal. She wrote without structure, just fragments of thought. "This isn't about fame. It's about dignity. I didn't sit to be seen. I sat because I was tired of erasure. One name at a time, that's how it changes." Then she flipped to a blank page and titled it, "The Names That Matter." She wrote Marisol Gloria Malik, Rachel, the woman in the aisle, the man who nodded, The girl who DM'd me that she stayed in her engineering class because of me. The ones who won't go viral. The ones still afraid to sit down. By the time the plane landed, her page was full. The wheels touched the runway. Camilla didn't look out the window this time. She closed the journal and held it to her chest. At baggage claim, she stood alone until Malik's tall frame appeared through the crowd. He hugged her like a child, tight and long. "You made it," he said. She pulled back and looked into his face. "We all did," she said quietly. "In the car." He drove while she watched the city roll by. Her city. Their city. He finally asked, "So what's next?" Mom Camilla looked out the window for a long time before answering. "We keep going," she said. "We teach. We listen. And when we have to, we sit still until the world shifts around us." Malik nodded, eyes on the road. "You always make it sound simple." "It's never simple," she said, "but it's always worth it." The boardroom sat on the 34th floor, behind sleek glass walls and beneath soft lighting that tried too hard to feel welcoming. Camilla stood in front of the long table, her calm presence in sharp contrast to the anxiety humming beneath the surface of the room. 12 people sat waiting, executives in tailored suits, legal advisors with laptops open, a few PR consultants pretending not to check their phones. They had flown in from across the country for this meeting, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. At the head of the table sat Clifford Ames, interim CEO of Horizon Air. His silver hair and tired eyes betrayed a career shaped by numbers, not people. He nodded when Camilla entered, but said nothing. Next to him sat Harper Ellis, the only other black woman in the room, VP of Strategy, sharp eyes, and the quiet kind of authority that made you sit straighter without realizing it. Harper gave Camilla a respectful nod. It said, "I see you. And I've been waiting for this." Camilla sat slowly. She didn't shuffle papers. She didn't open a laptop. She just spoke. "I'm not here to accept an apology," she said. "And I'm not here for a settlement. I came because what happened to me wasn't a one-time incident. It was a symptom." No one interrupted her. She continued, her voice clear and unhurried. "Let me be clear. I am a CEO. I was seated in first class, with a ticket that bore my name. I was not loud. I was not aggressive. And still, I was asked to move, because someone else assumed I didn't belong." She let that sink in. It could have ended there. I could have stood up. I've done it before. I've given up space to keep the peace. But that day, I didn't. And the world noticed. She opened the small leather folder in front of her and pulled out a printed sheet. "This is a list of the messages I've received since the incident, just the ones from airline staff." She passed it down the table. Gate agents, cabin crew, baggage handlers, people of color, women, LGBTQ+ staff. Some of them wrote anonymously. Most said the same thing. "Thank you. You said what we couldn't. You did what we weren't allowed to." A man near the end of the table cleared his throat. "We've conducted a review of the incident. The flight attendant involved has been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation." Camilla didn't look at him. She looked at Clifford Ames. "With respect, administrative leave is not reform. You're treating symptoms, not the system." Ames leaned forward. "Then tell us. Oh, what does reform look like to you?" Camilla didn't hesitate. "Start with training. Not just customer service basics. Teach your staff about bias, about power, about what it means to see someone fully." She looked around the table. "Then fix your escalation policies. Make them transparent. Make them fair. Right now, Discretion sits too heavily in the hands of those least trained to handle crisis with equity. Someone else spoke. Those kinds of programs take time to develop. Camilla smiled faintly. So does rebuilding trust. But I suggest you start both. There was a pause. Harper Ellis broke it. We've reviewed the employee data, too. She said, in-flight leadership roles are disproportionately white, especially in first-class and international routes. Your own numbers confirm it. She looked around, and in 2 years, there hasn't been a single disciplinary action filed over passenger profiling. Not because it hasn't happened, but because you haven't given staff or passengers safe channels to report it. Camilla turned to Harper. Thank you, she said quietly. Harper nodded. It's past time. Ames folded his hands. And what would you have us do now? Camilla answered without blinking. I want a public commitment, not to me, but to every person who's ever been made to feel less welcome in the air. She leaned in. Revise your training. Elevate your hiring standards. Diversify your leadership. Partner with organizations that can guide you through real cultural reform. Do it publicly and do it thoroughly. Because now the world is watching. Another executive spoke up. What happens if we don't? Camilla gave him a look that wasn't angry. Just resolute. Then this won't be the last time someone like me has to sit down, so the rest of the world will stand up. The room fell quiet. Clifford Ames cleared his throat again. This time with intention. Dr. Reese, he said, I admit we failed in ways we didn't even realize. And your composure in the face of that failure is remarkable. I'll take your recommendations under full consideration. Camilla raised an eyebrow. With respect. Mr. Ames, I'm not asking for consideration. I'm offering a roadmap. The rest is up to you. She stood. The room followed. On her way out, Harper walked with her. You gave them something today, she said. I gave them clarity, Camilla replied. Now they can choose who they want to be. Before they parted, Harper reached into her blazer and handed Camilla a business card. In case you ever want to consult or run your own airline. Camilla laughed quietly. Let me recover from this one first. Back in the elevator, Camilla exhaled. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't needed to. Her presence had done the work. In the lobby, a receptionist smiled at her nervously. Dr. Reese, there's someone here who asked to wait for you. Said he knows you. Camilla's brow furrowed slightly. Who a young black man stepped forward from the seating area. Early 20s, slender, nervous. Hi, he said. My name's Devin. I was on your flight. Row 8. I didn't say anything then, but I should have. Camilla's eyes softened. You don't owe me anything, she said. I do, he replied. You taught me that silence is a choice, and next time, I won't choose it. Camilla placed a hand on his shoulder. Then that's more than enough. He walked away into the street, shoulders a little higher. And for the first time that week, Camilla felt something more than resolve. She felt hope. It had been 6 weeks since the day the world learned her name. Camilla stood at Gate 6A with nothing in her hands except a slim notebook and a small carry-on. The airport felt the same muted announcements, the clink of rolling suitcases, the quiet shuffle of families trying not to miss their boarding groups. And yet it didn't. It never would again. She wore no disguise, no sunglasses, no hat to tuck her face beneath. She had nothing to hide from anymore. The boarding area wasn't packed, but a few heads turned as she approached. She could feel the soft wave of recognition pass from seat to seat. No one came up to her. but there were nods. One man gave her a quick thumbs up. A child pointed before her mother gently lowered his hand and whispered something in his ear. The gate agent smiled warmly. "Welcome back. Dr. Reese, your seat is ready." Camilla nodded. "Thank you." She walked down the jet bridge slowly, almost reverently. It wasn't about the plane. It was about what it represented. Flight, forward motion, trust. She stepped into the cabin and was greeted by a tall flight attendant with sandy blonde hair. "Good afternoon, Dr. Reese," he said. "We're honored to have you aboard." Camilla's seat was 1A. She sat down, placed her notebook in the seat pocket, and took a breath. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a reminder. She had once sat still while the world spun in circles, and now, it seemed, the world had paused just slightly to listen. As the cabin filled, Camilla opened her notebook and began to write. Not a speech, not a press release, just a letter to herself. You stayed seated, and that seat became something larger than you. You didn't plan it. You didn't want it. But you didn't run from it either. A few rows back, she heard a familiar voice. "Is that her?" It was a whisper, but clear enough. "She's the CEO. Right, the one who, you know." Camilla didn't turn. She didn't need to. She wasn't here to be noticed. She was here to remember who she'd always been. The captain came over the intercom. His voice was deep, composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 7112 with direct service to San Francisco. This flight has a very special passenger with us today. Though I won't call her out by name, I will say that some people lead by making noise. Others lead by making space. If you're sitting in peace right now, it might be because someone else decided not to move." Camilla closed her eyes. It wasn't about fame. It was about permission. The permission to stay, to exist, to be seen. During the flight, a young woman approached. She was clearly nervous, gripping a book too tightly in her hands. "Dr. Reese," she said, just above a whisper. Camilla turned and offered her the gentlest smile. "Yes, I don't want to interrupt. I just wanted to say I'm starting law school because of you. I was going to defer another year, but when I saw what you did, I realized silence wasn't going to protect me." Camilla reached out, touched the girl's hand. "What's your name, Imani?" she replied. "Imani," Camilla repeated. "That means faith?" Imani smiled, eyes glassy. "Yeah, my grandmother named me." Camilla nodded. She must have known you'd be brave. Imani handed her the book she had been carrying. "Would you mind signing this?" Camilla looked down. It was a copy of Women Who Refuse to Move Stories of Quiet Power. Her name wasn't on the cover, but now it was inside. After Imani walked back to her seat, Camilla stared out the window. The clouds below looked soft, forgiving. She let herself rest. Not in weariness, in fullness. As they descended, the sun cast long shadows across the tarmac. From the air, the runways looked like open paths, clean slates, pointing outward. After they landed, the passengers began to disembark, one by one. Some glanced at her. Others said nothing at all. But in their silence, Camilla heard the echo of something different than before. Not pity, not curiosity, but respect. She waited until the cabin was nearly empty before rising. As she gathered her things, the flight attendant who had greeted her appeared again. "I just wanted to say," he began, "my sister's in HR at Horizon Air. She said the company started changing some of their internal policies. Your story was part of the training for new staff this month. Camilla tilted her head. They actually used it. He nodded, not just as a cautionary tale. As an example of grace. She smiled. Not broadly. Just enough to let the warmth rise behind her eyes. "Thank you," she said. In the terminal. Her son Malik was waiting. He looked older every time she saw him. He opened his arms wide and hugged her without words. They walked out into the late afternoon sun, a rhythm between them only family could share. "So," Malik asked, "are you going to keep flying?" Camilla looked up at the vast sky. "I think so," she said. "There are more places to go." They reached the curb before getting into the car. Camilla turned and looked back at the terminal. A woman walked by pulling a suitcase, earbuds in, moving quickly. A child sat cross-legged on the floor reading a book. A young man helped an elderly passenger to her gate. The world kept spinning. But this time, it spun just a little differently. Camilla got in the car and placed her notebook on the seat beside her. It was full now, pages lined with names and voices, fears and victories, runways not just for planes, but for people, for possibility. She smiled softly and whispered to herself, "Let's keep building." Because for every woman who'd ever been asked to move, for every person told their presence was a problem, for every child watching how the world treats those who don't fit the mold, Camilla had stayed seated, and in doing so, she helped everyone else stand. She didn't shout, she didn't argue, she simply stayed seated. But that one choice echoed far beyond the walls of that airplane. It started conversations, shifted policies, and reminded a world too comfortable with silence that dignity is not negotiable. Dr. Camilla Reese's story is more than a moment. It's a movement that calls out discrimination where it hides behind politeness, a movement that says no more. If you felt something today, if her story reminded you of your worth, your strength, or your right to be seen, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel, because we'll keep telling the stories that make you think, that make you feel, that make you remember. And next time you witness someone being erased, maybe you'll remember her, the woman who stayed seated, so the rest of us could finally stand. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.